Diavolo's eyes opened, but they did not see. His body was heavy, lifeless, dragged to the ground by the weight of something invisible. His mind had just been torn apart. Again. The world around him shifted. Fragments of reality broke into jagged pieces, crashing into his consciousness like the remains of some forgotten universe. He had died. Again. It wasn't a question, it was a certainty. Death was his constant companion, a cycle that played out with chilling regularity. Every time he came so close to his goal, to becoming the true ruler of the world, it was ripped away by some unseen force. And here, on the floor of this fractured realm, his thoughts began to return to him. Where am I now? A sound, sharp and cutting, echoed through the void. The voice of a man. No, something worse. Something that sent a tremor through his bones, even in this endless dark. What just happened in this place? Diavolo forced himself to his feet, his hand gripping the air as if it would solidify under his touch. He wasn't alone. There it was. That familiar feeling of someone, something watching him. He turned, the fragments of his mind swirling, trying to form an understanding. And there, in the distance, a figure emerged, standing amidst the chaos. A being that wasn't quite human, but radiated an overwhelming power. It was Conquest. Conquest, the unstoppable force sent by a higher power to ensure the future of the Viltrum Empire. His purpose? To eliminate any resistance and conquer all that stood in his way. And here, standing before Diavolo, he seemed like a force of nature, something beyond the mortal realm. Diavolo's eyes narrowed. "You were given orders," Conquest's voice boomed, its resonance enough to shake the very air. "You were given time. You were given more freedom than most. But I see that the planet is not prepared for the arrival of Viltrum." Diavolo felt his pulse quicken. A brief moment of clarity pierced the fog of his thoughts. He knew this battle would be unlike any other. This wasn't some lowly opponent to be crushed by King Crimson. This wasn't just a matter of fate. This was the raw force of destruction, a harbinger of cosmic chaos. Conquest raised his hand, fingers crackling with energy, his gaze piercing into Diavolo's very soul. "You have no chance against me," Conquest continued, his voice a distorted symphony of power. "I'm Conquest, and I'm your last chance to fulfill your duty." Diavolo felt his breath catch. This was the first time someone had dared to speak to him this archaically, so arrogantly. "I'm not the person you're looking for, deaf old man. Can you hear me from up there? Why don't you come closer so I can match your eyes, old-timer?" The words left his lips, but they had little effect. The towering figure of Conquest did not flinch, did not move. Good. Diavolo cracked his neck, a slow, deliberate motion. His stand, King Crimson, flickered at his side, its power ready to take form. The time was now. His mind focused as he steeled himself for the battle that was about to unfold. "Stay, stay away from me," he hissed, the words barely more than a growl. Conquest's lips curled into an eerie smile. "So, you finally understood. You're not dealing with an ordinary opponent." The battle was about to begin. Diavolo's consciousness flickered back to life in the cold, oppressive dark. His head ached. No, his entire existence was a heavy weight pressing him into the ground, pushing him into a state of incomprehensible confusion. It was the feeling of dying, then being reborn, only to feel the crushing pressure of failure once more. He had died. Again. But death, to Diavolo, was no longer a surprise. It was part of the cycle, a constant reminder of how close he came to the power he desired, only to have it torn away at the last possible moment. His mind raced, memories of the endless fights, the wars, the betrayals, all swirling together into an incomprehensible whirlpool of regret and rage. Where am I now? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as if the very universe itself refused to provide an explanation. A deep, dissonant hum reverberated through the space around him. It was not a sound Diavolo was familiar with, a buzzing, like a distant echo of something far greater than any mortal could understand. The vibrations made his skin crawl, and his senses flared. He wasn't alone. There was something here. He lifted his head slowly, struggling to focus his blurry vision. His surroundings were shifting in impossible ways, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling. He reached for his stand, King Crimson, only to find that his power wasn't responding the way it should. The rules of this place felt different, wrong. But there, in the swirling chaos, something emerged. A silhouette. At first, Diavolo thought it was a hallucination, but no. The figure stood solid, its presence radiating a dark, undeniable power. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered, an overwhelming force of nature, towering above him like a god. The air itself seemed to bend around the figure, warping as if the laws of physics themselves were bending at its will. The figure's voice broke through the silence. "Where am I now?" it muttered, its tone cold and filled with malice. The voice was a distorted metallic rasp, a sound that gripped Diavolo's very soul. Diavolo's eyes narrowed. Another presence. Diavolo's body tensed. He felt the oppressive weight of this entity, not just a person but a force, something that transcended mere mortality. The figure's form began to solidify as the shadows cleared. It was humanoid, but far beyond the limits of what could be called human. Muscular, armored, and with eyes that glowed with an unnatural intensity. This being radiated an aura of war, of unrelenting conquest. Its presence was suffocating, an embodiment of absolute domination. The figure's voice moved again. "I found another one around here," it said, voice dripping with disdain. "How many more times am I going to die?" Diavolo's breath caught in his throat. He'd heard this before, this sense of inevitability, this feeling of being dragged into something that was too big to understand. The figure looked down at him, locking eyes with a gaze that could crush a lesser being's resolve. "Get ready for my arrival, worm. The time is now." Diavolo gritted his teeth. His instincts flared. There was no doubt in his mind now. This wasn't just some regular opponent. This wasn't a rival or an adversary. This was something beyond comprehension. And he could feel his power, his stand, already preparing to clash. "I am Conquest, the Viltrum Empire's answer to your resistance. They've sent me here to cleanse your world. There's nowhere left to run." Conquest's words struck Diavolo like a thunderclap. Viltrum Empire? He'd heard whispers of such things in his distant past, but the words had no meaning to him. Now they did. Diavolo stood shakily, his hands curling into fists. The weight of his failure, the constant cycle of dying and coming back flashed through his mind. But there was no time for self-pity. He had to survive this. He would survive this. He took a step forward, his voice sharp and cold, like a blade. "This is a misunderstanding," Diavolo growled, staring directly at Conquest. "I'm not the subject you're looking for. I don't answer to anyone." Conquest's smile was all teeth, cold and predatory. His eyes glowed brighter.
You misunderstand. The Viltrum Empire doesn't care who you are. You will bend to the will of the Empire, or you will perish. Diavolo's heart began to pound. He could feel the familiar presence of King Crimson rising behind him, and with a swift motion, his stand flickered into existence, its red, violent energy crackling around him. "I'm not your pawn, old man," Diavolo spat, his voice seething with fury. "I'm not deaf. Can't you hear me? Why don't you come closer so I can see those glowing eyes up close?" His voice echoed in the vast, distorted space, but Conquest didn't flinch. There was a brief moment of silence before Conquest's booming laugh rang out, distorted and inhuman. His presence seemed to swell, filling the void like an impending storm. "Good. Stay, stay, stay away from me," Diavolo hissed, stepping back, sweat running down his face. He could feel the overwhelming pressure of Conquest's power pressing down on him. This wasn't just a fight. It was a war for his very existence. Conquest's smile widened, and for the first time, Diavolo saw a glimmer of what true power looked like. It wasn't something that could be measured by mere physical force, but by the crushing weight of inevitability, the unstoppable force of a cosmic empire determined to bend the universe to its will. The battle had begun.
Diavolo stood his ground, every nerve in his body alight with the thrill of battle. His mind was already calculating the inevitable. This fight was a test. He had faced countless enemies, but Conquest? Conquest was different. It wasn't just the sheer power that radiated from him. It was the fact that his very presence seemed to bend reality. There was something incomprehensible about this being. Conquest was more than just a warrior. He was a force that would break Diavolo if he didn't act quickly. "Don't think for a second that your stand will save you," Conquest taunted, his voice like thunder. Diavolo's hand twitched. He could feel King Crimson at the edges of his consciousness, waiting for the signal. He had always been able to control time with a single thought, bending it to his will, using his stand ability to erase short moments in time. But Conquest's very existence distorted the fabric of reality around him. It was like fighting an overwhelming tide of cosmic energy, an energy that warped time and space itself. Diavolo raised his hand, and King Crimson materialized beside him. The stand's crimson energy crackled in the air, its power vibrating with anticipation. The atmosphere around them seemed to distort, like a mirage in the desert, flickering in and out of focus. Conquest smiled, his expression one of pure amusement. "Do you think that power can defeat me? You will fall as all others before you." Without warning, Conquest raised his hand, and the space around them twisted. Diavolo's body tensed as the air shimmered. Something moved within the fabric of reality itself, as if time itself was being shaped to Conquest's will. Suddenly, the ground beneath Diavolo cracked open, and a wave of dark energy exploded from the rift, launching towards him. The force behind it was unimaginable. Diavolo barely had time to react. He reached out instinctively, and King Crimson moved with terrifying speed. The stand's hand shot forward, creating a rip in the timeline. Time skipped. In an instant, the blast that was about to hit Diavolo disappeared, erased, as though it had never existed. But it wasn't enough. Conquest's eyes glowed even brighter, and he advanced, moving with the grace of a predator. "You think you can escape from time itself? I am the one who commands time now." Diavolo's chest tightened as the reality around him warped. The very space they were in seemed to stretch and bend, turning into a surreal, nightmarish landscape. Buildings twisted into impossible shapes, and the sky flickered like a broken television. "This world is mine,"
Conquest continued, his voice echoing across the fractured reality. Diavolo's breath came in short, controlled bursts. The air around him shimmered with an unnatural pressure, the very fabric of reality twisting like a torn sheet in the wind. His eyes locked onto Conquest, who stood tall and unyielding, exuding an aura that made Diavolo feel insignificant. Time and space seemed to fold under Conquest's will, but Diavolo refused to falter. This was not the first time he had been pushed to the edge. Conquest's smile stretched wider, twisted, and filled with arrogance. "You still don't understand, do you, Diavolo? Time is no longer your ally. It is my tool." Diavolo's pulse quickened. King Crimson. His stand flared to life, but the eerie stillness in the air suggested that something was wrong. Diavolo's mind raced as the moment stretched into infinity. It was like moving in a dream, slow and sluggish, where the power of his stand should have bent time, but the very laws of reality were shifting. Without warning, the ground cracked beneath Diavolo's feet. The earth itself seemed to recoil, and then an explosion. A rift in reality tore open, jagged and violent, as dark energy surged from the hole in the earth. It wasn't just an attack, it was the distortion of the very concept of existence. Reality itself was bleeding. Diavolo's instincts kicked in. His hand shot forward, and King Crimson's massive fist shattered the space around him. Time erased, the explosion vanishing in an instant, as though it had never existed. But it wasn't enough. Conquest's eyes narrowed, glowing brighter as the air around him hummed with an unsettling energy. A low, resonating growl rippled from his throat. "Is that all you have, Diavolo? You think you can erase time and escape from me? I am the will of an empire that spans the stars. You cannot run from me."
And with that, the ground beneath Diavolo's feet began to distort again. The very space shuddered, bending and twisting. The sky darkened, and from the rift in the world's fabric, a stream of shadow poured forth, lashing out like tendrils of darkness. They moved with purpose, wrapping themselves around Diavolo's limbs, pulling him in every direction. Conquest's voice boomed from above, his figure looming over Diavolo like a god. "You cannot hide from time, Diavolo. Not even your precious King Crimson can save you now." Diavolo's heart pounded in his chest as he felt his body being pulled apart by the relentless force of Conquest's power. His mind, sharp and unyielding, pushed through the pain, focusing on the one advantage he still had, his ability to alter time itself. He would not be broken, not by Conquest, not by anyone. "King Crimson!" Diavolo shouted, his voice laced with fury. In an instant, the world snapped. The time around him fractured, and he vanished, disappearing from the tendrils that had ensnared him. The darkness ripped apart in an explosion of energy as Diavolo reappeared a moment later, behind Conquest, with his stand's hand already reaching for the fatal strike. But Conquest was ready. With a single fluid motion, Conquest's form blurred. His body shifted impossibly fast, moving like a predatory shadow. He spun around, his fist a blur of power. Diavolo's eyes widened just in time to see Conquest's massive hand crashing toward him. Too slow. The impact was like a god's punch, sending Diavolo sprawling across the cracked earth. His body slammed into the ground, the impact leaving a crater. Pain flared in every inch of his body, but he gritted his teeth. He wasn't done. I told you, Conquest sneered, his tone thick with disdain. The Veltrum Empire does not fall to the likes of you. Diavolo rose to his feet, shaking off the blow. His blood boiled with rage, but his mind remained focused. The only way to win was to outsmart him, outlast him. Diavolo's stand, King Crimson, was built for exactly this kind of confrontation. A battle of wills, where the victor wasn't always determined by the force of power, but who could outmaneuver the other. Conquest. Diavolo spat, his voice low, filled with seething anger. You have no idea who you're up against. I've torn the world apart with nothing more than my stand. Do you think your power can control time as I do? Conquest's eyes flared with fury. You talk as though you have any control over what happens here, but you do not. Your world, your reality, none of it belongs to you anymore. I am the one who commands the future. Diavolo's mind raced. He could feel it, the weight of Conquest's power. It was overwhelming, and yet Diavolo knew that the universe was not as solid as Conquest believed. Time could still be rewritten. Diavolo's hands trembled with anticipation as his thoughts flickered to the truth. His stand was not the only force capable of warping reality. Conquest's eyes locked onto him, as if sensing the change in Diavolo's demeanor. A dark laugh rumbled from his chest. You're desperate, you're cornered, but this is where it ends. Diavolo grinned. You may control time, but you don't understand it. King Crimson is not just a stand. It is the key to everything. With that, the space around them began to ripple and shimmer again, as if the world itself could sense the inevitable clash between two forces that should never have crossed paths. Conquest's power surged, but Diavolo was already moving. King Crimson's hand shot forward, grasping for the heart of the storm that was Conquest. Time split. The collision of their powers sent a shockwave through reality itself. The ground trembled beneath Diavolo's feet as time itself shattered around him. Conquest's overwhelming power surged through the very air, warping space, bending reality like a fragile sheet of glass. The world around them was no longer a coherent place. It was a fractured, distorted landscape, constantly shifting. Buildings melting into impossibilities, the sky swirling with storm clouds of dark energy, and the very laws of physics twisting in on themselves. King Crimson flickered beside Diavolo, its crimson energy swirling with intensity. It had been a long time since Diavolo had felt a fight of this magnitude. Conquest was not just an enemy, he was a cosmic force, one that was as ancient and unyielding as the universe itself. But Diavolo would not be cowed. He had faced death countless times, and each time he had returned stronger. He would face this challenge the same way. Conquest stood tall in the shifting void, his presence a tower of raw, destructive power. His eyes burned with an unholy light, and his voice was filled with mocking disdain.
You can't escape, Diavolo, Conquest's voice boomed, distorting and reverberating through the torn landscape. You are trapped in my world now. Time bends to my will. I am time. You are nothing. Diavolo's hands clenched into fists, his jaw tight with anger. The audacity of this being, to think that he could control everything, time, reality, space. Diavolo had never been so certain of his own rage, but now standing against Conquest, it felt like the entire world was weighing down on him. And yet he couldn't allow himself to break. Not yet. King Crimson pulsed with energy, its hand reaching forward, ready to strike. You think you're the only one who can alter reality? You think you can control time? I am time. He raised his hand high, and with a twist of his wrist, King Crimson surged forward, moving with the speed of thought. The Stan's hand shot out, creating a rift in time that distorted everything in its path. The world around them fractured even further, as time itself seemed to warp and disappear in the wake of King Crimson's power. Conquest's face twisted with amusement, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something else. Recognition. He knew what King Crimson could do, and for the first time, Diavolo could see a hint of wariness in his expression. You are capable of manipulation, Diavolo, Conquest admitted, his voice colder now. But this is not a battle you can win. Not against me. And just like that, Conquest's hand shot forward. A blast of dark energy erupted from his palm, crashing through the air with the force of 1,000 storms. It tore at the very fabric of reality, sending waves of destruction outward. Diavolo's eyes widened as the attack tore through the space around him. Time, his time, was being bent and shredded before his very eyes. King Crimson moved instinctively, but even with its time-erasing power, Diavolo couldn't keep up. The attack hit him, sending him crashing backward into the twisted ground. His body slammed into what felt like solid concrete, but the moment he hit it, the reality of it dissolved into an endless chasm, swallowing him whole. Pain exploded in his chest, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. He was disoriented, his mind struggling to focus as the world seemed to flicker and fade around him. King Crimson flickered at his side, its form distorted by the chaos. But it was still there. It was his lifeline. Diavolo gritted his teeth, fighting against the crushing weight of the reality-bending attack. He had to get back up. He had to keep fighting. But the oppressive pressure of Conquest's power was suffocating. The very air felt thick with the feeling of inevitability. You can't fight what is inevitable, Diavolo. Conquest's voice echoed from above, booming and unrelenting. Everything you do, every move you make, is already part of my plan. Diavolo's vision cleared, and he saw Conquest standing tall, the rift in the sky behind him crackling with destructive energy. The cosmic warrior's eyes were glowing with malignant purpose, his every word dripping with the certainty of a being who had never known defeat. You are just a man, a fleeting speck in time, clinging to the idea of power. But I am a force. I am the hammer that crushes the weak. Conquest stepped forward, his boots sinking into the broken ground with each step. The very reality around them seemed to warp, bending under his will. Diavolo's heart raced. He could feel it, the truth of what Conquest was saying. He was right. Conquest was inevitable. He was unstoppable. But that didn't mean Diavolo would back down. It wasn't in him to quit. Diavolo stood up slowly, his legs shaking with the effort. He clenched his fists, feeling the power of King Crimson at his command. The battle wasn't over, not yet. He had died countless times, each time coming closer to his goal, and each time the cycle had begun anew. He refused to be a casualty of this endless war. He would rise again. You can control time, Conquest, Diavolo growled, his voice gaining strength, but you'll never control me.
And then, in a flash, King Crimson surged forward once more, its red energy blazing like a comet as time fractured again, this time with greater speed, greater power. Conquest's smile wavered slightly, and for a moment Diavolo saw something in his eyes, something human. For a brief second, Diavolo believed that this time he might just have the edge. Time had ceased to exist in the way Diavolo knew it. The world around him was an endless distortion, a warping of reality so profound that the very air felt thick with the pressure of it. The ground under his feet trembled and shifted, cracking and reforming in impossible shapes. The sky had long since been swallowed by swirling dark clouds, and the stars had disappeared from view. There was nothing but conquest. Diavolo's chest heaved with exertion, his body still aching from the brutal blows he had already taken. His stand, King Crimson, flickered beside him, its crimson energy crackling with intensity. The stand's form flickered and shifted, barely able to keep pace with the constant distortion of reality that Conquest's presence caused. But Diavolo's eyes burned with fury. He had been pushed to his absolute limits, and yet the battle wasn't over. He would not lose. Not to Conquest, not to this cosmic force. "I've had enough of this game," Diavolo growled under his breath, his eyes narrowing. His hands clenched into fists. "It's time to put an end to this." Conquest stood tall in the center of the ruined battlefield, his gaze piercing Diavolo's soul. There was no more playfulness in his eyes, no more mockery. Now Conquest was a force of destruction, a being who saw nothing but the crushing inevitability of his own will. "You still don't understand," Conquest said, his voice like the rumbling of thunder. "You think you can defy me? You think you can resist the might of an empire that controls everything? I've defied fate more times than you can imagine. And you've underestimated me, Conquest. You think you can control time? You can't even control your own destiny." Conquest's eyes flared with an unholy light. The very air around them seemed to crackle with the energy of 1,000 storms. He raised his hand, and with a gesture, the very ground beneath Diavolo's feet began to crack open, as the reality itself was being torn apart. "You'll regret those words," Conquest muttered, his eyes narrowing. His power surged, sending waves of dark energy spiraling toward Diavolo. The attack came faster than Diavolo could perceive. Reality bent, time stretched, and the very fabric of space seemed to rip as the dark tendrils of energy tore through the battlefield. King Crimson moved instinctively, its hand raised to stop the attack, but the power of Conquest's reality manipulation was overwhelming. It wasn't just an attack, it was a force that bent time itself. Diavolo's heart pounded in his chest. Time slowed down as his mind raced. King Crimson's hand moved forward, erasing the path of the attack, but the sheer magnitude of Conquest's power was too great. The dark energy ripped through time itself, erasing the moments before Diavolo could react. But just as the energy reached him, a flicker, a glimmer of hope. Diavolo's stand surged forward, its fist breaking through the flow of time. King Crimson reached out, grabbing hold of the attack before it could consume him. The moment bent and cracked as the force was erased. The world shattered into 1,000 pieces. The shockwave of energy was so intense that it tore through the space between them, forcing both Diavolo and Conquest to stagger back. For a moment, the battlefield seemed to go still. The distortion in the air was so thick that it felt as if the world had stopped altogether. In that single fleeting second, Diavolo saw it, the faintest tremor of doubt in Conquest's eyes. It was small, imperceptible, but it was there. "Impossible," Conquest muttered, his voice filled with disbelief. "You can't." Diavolo's eyes gleamed with renewed fury. This was the moment. He could feel it, deep inside his bones. King Crimson had opened a gap in Conquest's overwhelming control, the smallest fracture in the cosmic armor of the Viltrinian Empire. Diavolo raised his hand, his voice low and deadly. "Conquest, you've only given me more fuel from my fire."
And with that, King Crimson surged forward once more, its form becoming a blur of crimson energy. Diavolo's mind raced as the final battle between time and reality played out before him. King Crimson's hand tore through time, but this time it wasn't just an attack. It was a destruction of the foundation Conquest had built. "Crimson!" Diavolo roared, his stand's energy breaking apart the very fabric of reality. The moment Conquest's power flared again, Diavolo was there, moving faster than he had ever moved before. His body seemed to phase in and out of existence as he used the power of time to warp space around him. King Crimson's fist collided with the heart of Conquest's power. It was a clash that shattered the landscape. Conquest's scream was a howl of pure rage and defiance as the raw force of King Crimson's power collided with the very core of his being. Time and reality fractured as Conquest's form wavered, his immense power beginning to crumble under the weight of Diavolo's relentless assault. "You cannot win!" Conquest's voice crackled through the distortion, but it was growing weaker. His form flickered, becoming unstable. Diavolo's vision blurred, his body on the edge of collapse, but he could feel the battle drawing to its conclusion. He could feel it. Conquest's strength was fading. The final blow came with a single, resounding crack. King Crimson's fist collided with Conquest's chest, and time itself seemed to shatter. The force of the blow ripped through space, collapsing the very realm they were in. A flash of white light. Then silence. Epilogue. The echo of Conquest. The battlefield was still. The cracks in reality had closed, leaving behind a fractured world that seemed to breathe with the echoes of the battle. The sky had returned to a quiet, bruised twilight, the dark clouds dissipating like smoke in the wind. Diavolo stood amidst the ruins, his body battered, his stand fading as the remnants of his strength slipped away. His breath was shallow, each inhale a struggle, but the fight was over. Conquest was gone. The Viltrum Empire's might had crumbled in the face of King Crimson's power. The impossible had been achieved. Diavolo's gaze hardened as he stared at the remnants of the battlefield, his mind already moving forward. Victory, like everything else, was fleeting. "The world is mine," he whispered, his voice filled with cold finality. But in the silence that followed, one thing was certain. The battle between Diavolo and Conquest would echo through time itself. The forces of fate and power would always rise again, and Diavolo would always be ready.